Hello, all. This is Dr. Dave Maslach talking about reciprocity.com, the sharing economy proofreading platform that I'm trying to build. The E is spelled with a 3. In this particular video, I really wanted to talk about uniqueness and performance because I think this is a really interesting topic. So what I'm going to go into is define or talk to you, what do I mean by uniqueness, then get into sort of what does that mean in terms of strategy and performance. I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship. And we often talk about what causes performance and what leads to performance in companies or individuals or anybody like that. We're very interested in what is driving performance. So I think what I'm going to start off with in this particular video is I'm just going to actually define what I mean by uniqueness. So this is just the property of being one of the kind, property of being very unique and very distinct from somebody else. It's an interesting concept that I think that is particularly useful to understand performance and why people actually perform better than others, or why companies perform better than others. What we try to do and what we do in science is we actually try to look for the opposite. We try to look for generalizations across different companies, across people, across things, objects, right? We're always trying to look for generalizations, how they sort of fit together and how we can actually say that these sort of things fit together, these categories of things fit together. But often, if you think about it, it is often very, very weak associations across the different things that you're looking at. In fact, one of the ways that we study performance is we look at the variance, we look at the differences across different companies or individuals. We look at how things are different across many different things. And it often turns out that the variance, how sort of widespread or how much we can explain of this variance is often really tiny. We can't explain a lot generally of why people perform or why firms, companies, whatever it is you're looking at perform in a certain way. So we often know that most people are very unique. Most companies are extremely unique. In fact, it is one of the most it is the question that we tend to ask the most in my field is what makes companies very unique, right? And this is really strange because what we try to do in my field and many other scientific fields is we try to make these generalizations of what leads to high performance, right? We're often looking for what actually leads people to perform. So who is going to perform in the classroom, for example? How do we increase performance in a classroom? How do we increase performance of athletes? How do we get to develop a world-class athlete? How do we develop world-class companies? How do we increase the performance of industries, for example, whether they are reducing the amount of pollution that they have, right? All of these questions is really kind of unique, right? So we have this view, say, for example, if you want to become a high-performing athlete, that if you eat the right foods, you take the right supplements, then anybody can become a world-class athlete. And this is a little bit of a tricky thing to suggest, but we often think that's the case, and we often think that we try to generalize. We look at world-class athletes, for example, and we say that they're eating this food, they have these particular supplements that they're taking, that they are training like this, they have this kind of coach throughout their training regime. And we simply say that if anybody has all of those conditions, then we can perform a world-class athlete. And now this is kind of a strange thing to say and to suggest. So one thing I wanted to actually point out that I think my mom was right is she was always saying, if you look at trees, all trees are green, but they're all different. And this is a really kind of interesting concept. I want you to actually think about this. If you think about trees have all different kinds of shades of green. And what's really cool, if you start thinking about it, it's autumn right now, it's the fall, right? That's why I'm wearing a sweater, is that trees actually change colors and then they lose their leaves. But we still think of trees as having this kind of property, right? So we often say that trees are green, But there are a lot of exceptions where they're not green. In the winter, they don't have any leaves. They're actually gray or they're brown or something like that, right? And in the fall, they have all sorts of wonderful, beautiful colors that are just wonderful, and they're completely different from the green that we understand. So how do we know how do we actually generalize to a tree based on it being green, right? There's many situations, there's many cases where it doesn't necessarily fit. We can't necessarily say that all trees are green, and there's all these exceptions. So it's unusual to come up with these generalizations to suggest that if you take these kind of things, if you take all of these supplements, for example, if your firm has the right HR policies, if they have the right the right research and development, that if they have all of these conditions, that they're going to perform at a very high level compared to what everybody else is doing, right? So it's a really kind of odd thing that we actually expect that of human beings, of companies, of industries, or whatever you're looking at, that if you have these generalizations, that it's going to perform at that certain level, because we know in nature that is not necessarily the case, right? If you look at the generalizations of what makes a tree the highest tree in the world, it's often very contingent on many different factors that we can't factor in, that are outside of the control of the tree, right? The tree has nothing to do with those particular conditions, right? So it could be where it's located. For example, the tree is located close to the proximity of the equator, which is going to give it more sun and it's give it more ability to grow. But then even if it's close to the equator, maybe the sun is too hot and it's going to squash the growth of that tree, right? Maybe that there's so many trees all around it that it's going to choke out the amount of fuel it gets, the amount of water it gets, and it's going to reduce the amount of growing that it can actually grow, right? And then if you think about, well, that means by implication, the tree has been around a long time. It's had to have withstood or not been exposed to many different natural disasters that can actually destroy the tree and reduce the amount of growing that it can do, right? So just simply the fact of being around for a long time implies that it's going to be very high, as well as it implies that it did not experience any natural disasters, which is highly unusual, right? So there are many situations where it might be the case where a lot of trees might be destroyed, even if they could grow a very large distance or grow very high, and they just experienced a natural disaster which limited the amount of growth that they have. So it's really interesting, and what you have to understand when you look at performance is not only the fact that you're generalizing that, so these high performing individuals, they have all of these supplements, they eat all of whatever it is, as well as these high-performing companies, they have the right HR policies, they have the right research and development, they have all of these the right marketing, but you also have to look at the absence, the things that they haven't been exposed to, or maybe the sort of situational factors that allowed them to grow. Maybe they're in New York, for example, where there's tremendous amount of sort of other people around for support and things like that. You have to look at that and think about, why is there some sort of high-performing firm that is the case? Why is it actually there? And that uniqueness, in fact, what makes something really unique, you have to appreciate that high-performing individual, that high-performing firm is exceptionally unique and different, and perhaps is not necessarily the best thing that you should be chasing after, but rather what we maybe should be studying, what we maybe should be thinking about, and people should be thinking about, is what makes people and companies rather ordinary and sort of uniform and closer together, makes it into a much more mundane question, right? A question that is very simple and very basic, and we should probably be thinking about, why is it that companies and why is it that human beings all perform at the same level, and that we don't have all of these exceptions and all of these high-performing individuals, but rather most people are really, really ordinary and they go about their way. And then if you think about things in that sort of direction and that sort of logic, then perhaps we should be generalizing from these ordinary people. And if those ordinary people, those ordinary companies, those ones that are just really ordinary and boring and plain, and if we can shift the performance from that and increase the performance from that, then we have something that we can actually talk about and explain in a lot more broader sense than looking at high-performing individuals and thinking about only high-performing individuals and how to get to that particular high-performing individual. So what we should be thinking about is what makes somebody that is not necessarily a high world-class athlete become a world-class athlete. How do we shift behaviors in humans and people in North America to start thinking about maybe we should get them to exercise 10 minutes a day, rather than thinking about how do we become world-class athletes? How do we get people to exercise 10 minutes a day, an ordinary person to exercise 10 minutes a day? And that's going to have, it's going to have a much more bigger impact on sort of the population, but as well, it's probably going to be a lot more effective in terms of studying those populations, because we can actually generalize and make much more appropriate generalizations that is more suitable to more people, and we can explain a lot more stuff. It's going to reduce the amount of uniqueness that we see across the population by looking at very ordinary and just sort of simple everyday things. So I think that's the more important thing, is to not focus on uniqueness and the properties of being very, very unique and different and distinct, but rather what makes people very ordinary and what makes us, firms, companies, whoever, whatever you're looking at, what makes them, those ordinary people, those things, what makes them perform a little bit better? What can we shift this sort of mass of this mass of people in a different direction compared to what they are? I think that's a really unique and different thing to think about. So if you like these videos, you can watch the other ones. I do put out videos. I'm trying to put them out every day at this moment, so you can check those out. And if you want to get proofreading done, if you want to help out with the Reciprocity Project, you can watch some older videos. I explain exactly what that is. And Reciprocity website is Reciprocity, and the E is spelled with a 3, where you can get, hopefully, free proofreading as well. If you want to pay up front, you can sort of get much more quicker proofreading done by doing that. You can check out what I'm doing. All right, so thank you so much. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.